Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me. I am out here. All right. See if there's anybody that joins in here real quick. Otherwise, I will start and probably go through this pretty quick today. Calamuse out here in Buffalo County today. I'm in a soybean field just near Elm Creek. So I didn't move too far today. I'm kind of doing some work from home and a couple other things and then taking this afternoon off. So hopefully everybody that got to join in and watch the Scout Nebraska tour day earlier this week learned some and saw some cool things. I'm going to show just a handful of things in these beans and then kind of keep moving. And this will probably be a little bit of a shorter episode since we did do a longer scouting thing earlier this week. And so just something to keep in mind. If you are watching today, there is a longer series that we did on Wednesday, scouting crops all across Nebraska. But there are a couple people on, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Just to kind of repeat what I had just been talking about, I'm out here near Elm Creek in a soybean field, and I'm the only one on today. And so I'm just going to show a handful of things and go ahead and keep moving on. So today I was walking through these beans. Kind of one of the things that I mentioned here is that these beans, well, pretty much have closed canopy. It's a much more upright bean. They're not very bushy. They're not as bushy as other beans will be. And so we don't quite, I'm not even sure you can completely call this a closed canopy, but it is at least pretty closed. And they do have good weed management. There's very little weeds out here at this field. And so a couple things that I wanted to point out. This is some residue that I found on the ground. I hope everybody can see that clearly. And so this residue has some molds growing on it. Now I want to make this clear. These are not white molds, okay? I've got a lot of questions about white molds recently. White molds do not grow on residue. They do not grow across the ground. They do not do any of those things. The only phases of white mold are their sclerotia that start in the soil. They produce kind of these mushroom-like structures that are about the same size. So here's kind of like my thumb. Here is my pinky. You can kind of see it next to one of these pods. Okay, so these are not white mold mushrooms. These are bird's nest fungi. And they call them bird's nest because you can kind of see the little discs in there. Those discs are kind of the reproductive structures for this specific fungi. And then I am honestly not 100% sure what these are. These small little more globular, round spherical mushrooms. I am not sure what those are. But I just want to make it clear that this is not white mold of soybean. White mold of soybean starts as those black sclerotia in the soil, produce spores that get spread up to the flowers. So flowers occur at each node up here. They're kind of gone now from the R1 to R3 stages. And so it starts down here at R1, these flowers, and then it slowly works up kind of through R3 and you get flowers up here at the top. White mold can infect any of those flowers through that stage. So that's when management occurs. Any type of management for white mold after R3 is going to be ineffective and you're not going to get any control. Dylan is saying that those are LBMs for little brown mushrooms. So yes, we do have other mushrooms in here that are not white mold. And then the other thing that I want to show, again, we saw some of these here earlier this week, but I found a limp dead petiole. Let's see if I still have that petiole close by. And so the petiole is where the kind of the branch or the leaf trifoliate attaches to the stem. So this here is kind of the base of a petiole, and then it comes out and forms a trifoliate. So when you see limp or dead petioles, check those. It may be because you've got one of these little dudes, these Dectes stem borers, that worked their way in from kind of that region. And so This one, it may have infected up here. Justin McMecken talks a little bit about how they can enter in through the petiole like stem, or I believe they can enter in through kind of down here, and then they work their way down into the stem, and it will work all the way down here to the base, and then there at the base it will form kind of it'll just girdle it, so it'll just completely ruin the base of this stem, and then when you go through and try to harvest this, it'll just lodge, and you'll have more indirect losses than direct losses with these Dectes stem borers. They're not gonna cause like a huge reduction in some of those seed sizes, pods, those kinds of things, because it's in the pith. And so for those that may not completely understand the anatomy of a soybean plant, you can see how this center is brown and dead and a lot of necrosis in there. The outside is actually where all the vasculature is. So here, those are the vascular bundles. That's where water and photosynthates, all those kinds of things move throughout the plant. So actually, the photosynthate and water translocation throughout the plant is not impacted. It's simply those storage cells here in the center. And then as it gets down here, it'll girdle and break that stem off, and you'll lose pods because you're not actually harvesting them. They're just ending up on the ground. So that's kind of the big thing. There was a couple other things I wanted to show you over here, but I'm not finding it now. Does anybody have any questions about how these soybeans, we do have obviously some defoliation, and there's even a little bit of frog eye leaf spot, which is a Cercospora. Here we go. This I think is what I wanted to show a little bit. So again, a little bit of chlorosis here on these leaves, kind of intraveinal. Remember, interveinal chlorosis can mean a lot of different things. This is a single plant. It's the only one that I found throughout here. And so it really could be any number of things. If we look down here at the base of this plant, I'll turn it this way. I'm getting a notification that my phone doesn't like that orientation, but there is no white mold. Okay, again, anything you see on the ground here, like there's some residue here that's got some white mold on it, that is not white mold. That's a different, probably saprophytic fungi that's breaking down that residue. That's almost a good fungi. And so if you see any of that stuff, that's not a concern. The other thing, I wanted to mention that spraying, I mentioned earlier, spraying after. Dylan asked if that defoliation is caused from grasshoppers or beetles. I think a combination, a mixture. One of the cool things that I actually learned as well is that grasshoppers don't leave the veins on leaves. Japanese beetles do leave veins though. So this kind of here, you can kind of see how they chewed out everything in between the leaf veins. That I believe is the Japanese beetles. Whereas maybe some of these like larger holes and things, those might be grasshoppers. I've seen both in this field. And so that's just something that I guess I recently learned. So kind of something cool there. But yes, I am looking kind of at the base of this plant with some of that chlorosis and white mold. So here's another one of those dead petioles though. So if I move this, I don't want to knock the petiole off, but you can see that that's brown and has some necrosis to it, and then it all but falls off here at the base. Let's see if we can just find another Dectes stem borer for you. I didn't bring my knife today, which was a mistake, because you always want to cut these plants open to see what's going on inside. See if my nail did fine earlier, but I'm gonna struggle to get that one open. I am guessing, based off that symptom, that there's gonna be another one of those Dectes stem borers probably right down along in here, working its way down and gonna feed on that plant. So yeah, that's kind of for the most part what I wanted to share today. I just wanted to share, Dylan may be able to share a little bit more in the chat, but with white mold, we don't see much plant-to-plant infection. So when you do see that white mold on the base of those stems or kind of the middle of those stems, that actual real nice white mold that's nice and fluffy, that's not going to necessarily cause a whole nother infection on a whole other plant. I don't think there's much like plant-to-plant infection. It mostly comes from those spores getting into those flowers, and those flowers are now gone. So white mold can't even get into the plant hardly anymore. Just something to think about there. And so any application of a fungicide or anything like that post R3, so R4, R5, it's not going to do anything. And so Dylan's saying, yeah, obviously, yeah, those symptoms are delayed, and it's not going to be a meaningful plant-to-plant infection. So thank you, Dylan, for chipping in. If you don't know, he's commenting now from a crop disease YouTube channel. He posts a lot more about soybean diseases and what his lab at the university does. It's a lot of really cool stuff. And so I would recommend, if you're wanting to learn more specifically about soybean management, I would go check there as we keep going. And so, yeah, one other quick thing, I do have a Japanese beetle here. Kind of see how it's more skeletalizing that leaf with all those veins on that leaf still. So that's kind of what Japanese beetle feeding looks like in comparison to maybe grasshopper feeding. Little bit of frog eye leaf spot here again. So thank you for everybody that joined. Again, we do have a couple active bounties for Scout Nebraska. If you post a video with the hashtag Scout Nebraska on either X or Facebook identifying white mold or tar spot, so white mold of soybean, tar spot of corn, you can potentially win $100 and get a Scout Nebraska hat. And so please participate in those. We've got money to give away and are happy to do so. Other than that, keep following along. We'll be sharing updates like we have been and doing this weekly live event here throughout the rest of the season and hopefully beyond. So if anybody has any questions or any specific things that they want to see for this channel, please feel free to share that. And that, I believe, is mostly what I have for today. So thank you all very much for joining. I'm going to go ahead and hop off now. I